Nora Speaks is a weekly podcast that tugs at the soul and consciousness of the Black community. With show topics such as youth empowerment, education, women's impact, and civic engagement, Nora Speaks challenges the listener to not only join the movement, but be the movement. On the show, you'll learn from insightful guests who have demonstrated capacity in these fields and more, and I'm your host, Nora Muhammad. Welcome to the show. Welcome back to another episode of the Nora Speaks podcast, and I am your host, Nora Muhammad. Thanks for joining me in this episode of the podcast. And this episode, we're going to talk about something that you have probably seen or heard about in the national news. There's been more and more conversations about reparations. I saw last week that there's a bill in California that's going to, or intended to create a first of its kind agency that's going to administer economic reparations for slavery. And the California legislation is expected to vote on it this year. And but that'll be just the first step. And from what I've read, the California legislators, they'd also have to pass a reparations package before any money or benefits could be distributed. Same thing in New York. I saw where that governor has approved a commission to study the history of slavery in the state of New York and consider paying reparations. And, so California, New York, polar ends of the country. And so this has been something that we've been hearing about more and more. I know that last year or the year before, Chicago, they've began a reparations initiative as it pertains to housing, if I recall correctly. So we have some of the states, the municipalities, the cities looking into reparations, and there's also been movements nationally. There's national movements, national organizations that are working towards the descendants of American slaves getting reparations, or I should say, there's also confusion about who would be entitled to reparations and what the reparations would actually be for. So, for example, this is what I mean. Some people are saying, as critics to the idea of reparations, some people think that it is just impossible to place a monetary value on the impact of slavery. And some think that African Americans are treated equally today in society. Some critics say that there would be a generation, if reparations would be approved, either, locally or nationally, that the generations paying for it today had nothing to do with slavery, and that the generations who would be receiving reparations today had nothing to do with slavery. That could be debatable, depending on your perspective on that. Some folks say, again, that Black people have equality now. And then is reparations, or the notion of reparations, is that for slavery? Is that for Jim Crow? Is that for both? And then who, right? Are we specifically talking about Black people who are descendants of slavery? And so what would we all do? DNA testing? How do we solve this issue? How do we solve the problem in identifying the ones who would potentially be the recipients of it? And some have questioned the impossibility of this, because how do you measure the harm that was done to a people, right? And I guess this is my question. How do you measure harm that was done to an enslaved people who were destroyed physically, people who were destroyed mentally, people who were destroyed morally, right? You think about those individuals who came on the slave ships. They had their religion stripped from them. They had their languages were stripped from them. They had cultural customs stripped from them, pride, ambition, self-love, and self-worth. And so in thinking about reparations as, some financial return, like it's, someone at the register gave someone too much change and they're reimbursing the excess. I mean, this, in my opinion, doesn't quite get at restoring the damage. And so I won't say I'm not a proponent of reparations, but what I'm a proponent of more than anything is rehabilitation. And in this episode, I'll explain what I mean by that. And I think that reparations without rehabilitation is not really a redress. It's not really a solution. It's really not what's going to help our people, and it's not going to make up for the damage that was done. And when you're looking at the condition and the state of Black America, there's something different about these people. I'm talking about Black people who are descendants of slavery. I'm not talking about Nigerian Americans. I'm not talking about Ghanaian Americans. I'm not talking about Haitian Americans, Jamaican Americans. Though they may be Black, there's something very peculiar and specific about Black people who are descendants of American slavery. And so that's who I'm talking about in this conversation. And so what I would say is that without rehabilitation, meaning repairing the souls that were destroyed, our current habits, those of us in the Black community, specifically, again, the so-called African American, the descendant of slavery, our habits are habits of a people that have been remade into something new, someone far worse than who we were when the soles of our feet landed in North America. We're people that have been remade, and a monetary infusion in our community. Some in some municipalities and some towns, like Chicago, the reparations is specifically a discussion about housing, if I recall, right? So. And housing is ownership of a property that really just boils down to money. Giving these people, our people, giving us money for us to continue with the habits and behaviors of a destroyed people, which ultimately means that whatever we get, we're giving it right back. It is impossible. There's no people who don't have a proper knowledge of what makes a nation, what defines freedom. Anybody who has this understanding would know that seeking only finances as a measurement of reparation is not repair. The basis of freedom is land. And when we came to North America through the transatlantic slave trade, what was stripped from us was our freedom. Not only our language, not only our religion, not only our dignity, but land. And the basis of freedom is land. Land is what gives people an opportunity to develop self-sufficiency, right? Now, we worked on the plantations here in North America. We fought in wars so that the United States of America could be free and independent. And yet we are having discussions about reparations that do not include land. I'm not talking about homes. I'm not talking about houses and we're still paying taxes and we're still being treated as second-class citizens, right? I'm talking about territory so that we can express ourselves in a sovereign, free, and independent way. It's my opinion that any fair reparation must include the means for those people who've been afflicted to be free indeed, not in word, but to be free indeed. And that freedom is not freedom without repair and rehabilitation. So for us, Black people in America, descendants of American slavery, how can we who have been robbed, who have been raped, who have been killed for sport, who have been denied all human rights and decency, how can we be restored? And is money, is home ownership, is that the key to that? Or are we just people who are destroyed with a little money in our pocket until we've exhausted it buying fancy cars or nice sneakers or designer pocketbooks, right? I would say that until we are restored from the destruction that we've experienced, that there's no real authentic reparation. No authentic reparation would exclude us having the means to become a whole people. It's just not possible. And I'll also say that the civil rights goals, integration, social equality, being able to intermarry races, vote, hold offices, integrate schools, sit in the front of buses or down front in a movie theater, that is in no way the solution out of the hardship, out of the confusion, and out of the self-destruction of this people who have been destroyed morally, who have been destroyed spiritually, who have been destroyed economically, who have been destroyed morally. We've seen that the goals of the civil rights movement have not helped us as a people. It's helped us be more involved in the systems of this nation, in the processes of this nation, in areas that we are allowed, that we are permitted. Because remember, the Voting Rights Act, that was initiated, although we were given the right to vote, the Congress still had to pass laws so that we can take advantage of the right that we were given, because we were still being blocked from engaging in voting as a right. So even after the federal they integrated the schools, the National Guard still had to come out and stop people from preventing little black children from going into the school. So even after there's been laws put on the books, there's been amendments to the Constitution, even after that, there still are mechanisms that prevent us from engaging fully. So again, how can we have an authentic reparation without us having the rehabilitation, meaning the ability to become whole? What would that look like? And does America really have the capacity to pay that debt? I don't know that it does, right? The damage to our people has been so severe and so thorough. Now, I'm not saying this to say, well, just forget it. We don't need reparations. That is not what I'm saying. What I'm trying to do in this conversation is to make us think a little more critically, have us think with a little more depth, examine our behaviors, examine our practices, examine how we treat each other, how we treat ourselves and our position as it relates to others. Really think about that. Now, I don't know what the monetary value would be if they gave every black person $500,000 for reparations. What are we going to do with the money? How could we manage it when we have not been given good education, ambition to want to do something for ourselves? You know, our desire and our identity here in this nation is really not a black identity per se. Our identity is we strive for an American identity. Even though America, the United States of America, was not founded, black man and black woman, with us having the enjoyment of freedom, justice, and equality. I mean, that was just not part of the inception of this nation. It was not foundational in this country. Remember, 3/5 of a person. The chicken was a whole chicken. The cow was a whole cow. The dog was a whole dog. The lamb was a whole lamb. And black man and black woman, you were 3/5 of a person. Now, I'm not saying this to make anybody feel badly if you're a Caucasian person listening to this. I'm just talking about history. We were just not part of the original founding. Our interests were not part of the original founding. And that is just a fact. However, our identity, the identity that we, the American dream, the wanting to be able to see our sons play professional basketball, play professional football, get a few dollars in their pocket and feel like we've made it. That's not making it. We are not quite sure what our identity is as descendants of slaves in America. I mean, let's think about it. We know that we have a very, very unique problem. We should know. Maybe we don't know that we have a very unique problem, descendants of American slavery. Think about history, right? The Jews who came out of the Holocaust, they knew they were Jews. They knew they had a religion. They knew they had a language, right? The Japanese who were bombed in Japan, those Japanese that were interred in the United States, they had an identity. They were very clear on who they were. And they understood also that their mistreatment was tied to their identity, right? The indigenous, the natives in North America, they too have an identity, very clear on who they are, their languages, their religions, their customs, ambitions, self-worth, and their group entitlements. Like all of that is still present, even though they were a people totally mistreated and treated unjustly. Now, black people in America, we don't know who we are. We don't know who we were. We don't know who we should be. And this is evidenced by our current condition, by what we see. We do not quite know who we are. And so I'll say, too, that it is really unfair to expect our former slave master, the oppressor of our people, to be the one responsible for that repair. Do they have the capacity? Do they have the means to initiate the kind of rehabilitation that we need? Again, I am not saying that we are not entitled to reparations. But before we think about receiving reparations, we should be thinking about rehabilitation, because just look at the examples that we've had of our people who have had a windfall of money through the lottery, through sports, entertainment. When they have that windfall, that doesn't mean now that they have access to millions of dollars, that doesn't mean that their alcoholism goes away, right? That doesn't mean that their drug addiction goes away. That doesn't mean that their self-hatred goes away. That doesn't mean that their irresponsibility goes away. No, they're just a drug addict now with millions of dollars. They're still an irresponsible person, but now they have millions of dollars to be irresponsible with. This is what I mean. We are a people in need of rehabilitation. We are in need of restoration. We are a people in need of repair. And so that's got to be part of the conversation when we're talking about reparations. I mean, money, that's easy. You can throw money at somebody, and when they're ignorant, you can expect to get that money back, right? And so we have to be very careful, and we have to be very wise when people are talking about, hey, look, I'm sorry I hurt you. Here's a, $100 bill. I think this should cover it, right? I mean, even if you're in a car accident, you don't want to listen to what the other attorney says and says, here's $500. I know you can use it. Here's $500. Take this. This should cover the cost. This should make us even. With their fast talk, you say, oh, wait. I need to go get somebody to advocate for me the way you're advocating for your client, so you can speak to my attorney, sir or ma'am, right? So we have to be very careful when people are extending their hands, giving us or attempting to give us something to say, look, now we're even. But are we? Are we who we were before we were destroyed? Money does not change that. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Nora Speaks podcast. Until next time, stay in peace.
We were brought here as a piece of property. And to keep that piece of property, it is to not allow the property to know the value of the property. What I mean by that, if you had known the history of yourself, you would not have been made a slave. And you won't be a slave now if you have a knowledge of yourself. It's hard to enslave a person that have equal knowledge with you. You just can't do it. And so this knowledge of yourself is the thing that will free you from what you have been suffering from.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Nora Speaks podcast. Be on the lookout for a new episode coming at you fresh next week. And as always, if you want to learn more about me and the work that I do, visit my website, norahmuhammad.com. Or if you have a listener question, email me at info@norahspeaks.com. You can also follow the Nora Speaks podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Nora Speaks Podcast. I'll be sure to include links in the show notes. If this show has value to you, please subscribe, rate, and review, and share it with family and friends. And be sure to check out previous episodes. And remember, don't just join the movement, be the movement. Stay in peace.